So while you answer the poll question, I will introduce today's speakers with us, wherein yeah, Bob Baxley. Bob Baxley is an experienced design leader who has worked on designing some of the most iconic products that you interact with. In his career, spanning almost 3 decades, he has worked with companies like Yahoo, Apple, Pinterest, ThoughtSpot, and spearheaded design for Yahoo Answers, Apple Online Store, and more. So now coming to Prasad, Prasad has over 20 years of experience in UX and holds 12 plus patents and papers. He is the co-founder of UX Reactor, an Inc. 5000 firm, an alumnus of Business Harvard Business School. Prasad has also worked with Yahoo, Honeywell, eBay, and ServiceNow. He is the face behind the widely used internet search assistant feature. So now we have these great people who can guide all of you um, with their expertise. So I will hand over the session to Bob and Prasad.
Hello, everyone. So, do we get to see the answers?
Yeah, I will share the poll report.
This is really cool.
Yeah, I have shared the report.
There we go. Wow, a lot of new grads.
Yeah. UX design has really taken off in the last few years in India. It's like it's gone like crazy. So it's very nice. But thank you everyone for joining us today. Like Sahiti said, I'm Prasad. But more importantly, we have with us Bob. I was the kid on the block when Bob was leading the design team at Yahoo. And he's done lots of amazing stuff. Like just one simple thing is he was able to get Yahoo Answers to 100 million users, the fastest of its time at that time when I was in that team. It was just amazing watching how well it worked out. Then Yahoo went on. That was when Steve Jobs was coming out with the iPhone, and Bob joined Apple. He came out with the Apple Store. He spearheaded that activity. Then he went out to Pinterest, and then he ended up, building the Apple of business intelligence, with ThoughtSpot. And I think for a lot of us, Bob, this is a dream run. And you started off as a filmmaker. So could you, I think all of us would love to know how your journey progressed and how you ended up like hitting so many home runs.
Hey, thanks, Prasad, and thanks everybody for joining. It's awesome to be on a call. I hope everybody's having a lovely evening. ThoughtSpot was largely based in India, so I actually got to travel to India 7 times in the last year and a half, which is just as much as it sounds. I was mostly in Bangalore, but I've been around, and we had designers spread out across the country. So I've been there a few times. It's amazing and lovely. And I just want to point out 2 things that Prasad said. One was that he's been doing this for 20 years. And 2, that when he met me, when he just started out, I was already the old guy on the block. So that's as he didn't quite throw the number out there. But I moved to Silicon Valley from Dallas, Texas in 1990 to start as a designer in the very, very early days of UI with a company called Claris, which was a wholly owned software subsidiary of Apple and still is. They make a product today called FileMaker. And I got started working on ClarisWorks. And then Prasad, kind of to your question of like, how did I put together the career run? I never tried to put together a career run. Design wasn't a career in 1990. I mean, you probably could have put all of us on a bus together. Whereby everyone, I mean, like there's probably more people on this call right now than there were doing UI design when I started in 1990. So you didn't really think of it as a career. Looking back, I think the through line that ran through there, and you mentioned I studied film. So in my undergrad degree at University of Texas, I got a degree in film and a second one in history. And so it's no huge surprise that I'm, kind of interested and knowledgeable in film history. And I'm also very interested in the history of tech in Silicon Valley. And the through line in my career is just going to places that I thought would be an interesting place to witness something. And so, probably the best example there is the decision to leave Yahoo and go to Apple. And believe it or not, when I made that change, it was about 9 months before the phone came out. I had no idea the phone was going to happen. I mean, there's no way of knowing that. The hot product at the time was the iPod Nano, and Yahoo was still competitive with Google, and I was running a big team. Yahoo Answers was about to come out. There was a lot of goodness happening for me at Yahoo. But I looked at Apple, and somehow Apple had always been in my life since I was a teenager and first discovered computing. Somehow Steve Jobs himself was a character in my life. And my wife was talking to me about the history of Disney and how there were still people on this earth that had worked directly with Walt Disney. And I thought, like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And so actually the decision to go to Apple was mostly I wanted to go be in a place where Steve was. And I never thought I would work with him. I didn't think I'd ever get to present to him. Like it wasn't like I thought I would be in collaboration with Steve. I just wanted to be around that from a historical point of view and witness it. Um, obviously it turned into like quite the thing to witness, arguably the greatest run in business history. I was there for 8 years, joined just before the phone came out, left around the time the iPhone 8 was released. So it was just an amazing run, but totally dumb luck. Like I just had to kind of follow my instinct of history. And then it was that same thread that drew me to Pinterest. I joined in 2014. There was a lot of stuff happening up in that part of San Francisco. Uber was up there, Slack, Airbnb, Pinterest, some, Lyft, many others, none of which had gone public yet. So there was sort of this interesting, crazy, cool thing happening in sort of this 1 square mile area of San Francisco. And I just wanted to go see that. And I did. It wasn't quite as cool as Apple, but it had its moments and I got to see it. I know what that moment was about. Um, and then ThoughtSpot was kind of the same thing. I actually wanted to go to a company and see what it was going to be like when it went public. And when I joined ThoughtSpot, that was very much in the offing. Things happen. There was a big pandemic. You guys might have read about it. It was big news. So, that sort of shifted the timeline a little bit. And then it just turned out kind of, fortunately, it introduced me to India. And, honestly, as somebody sitting in Silicon Valley, I don't, there's not necessarily some way I would have learned a lot about India, but now I feel like I have kind of a handle on what's happening in India, not on the whole, obviously the whole thing, but, I have a better sense than most people I know in the United States, which turns out to be really interesting and useful and fascinating because India is having a golden moment, and has a very interesting and powerful and, inspirational moment on the world stage right now. And so I'm glad I got to pick that up as well. So.
Oh, it was fascinating for me too. It's like I see India and the kind of work that's happening. It's like it's super exciting. But I mean, not everything you did was dumb luck because I know your real story behind that. When you got to Claris, how did you get to Claris? Tell us about that.
Oh, well, Claris was an interesting story. So I had started a small graphic design studio when I got out of college, which, was 1985. It's sort of at the very advent of desktop publishing. And so we'd started a studio doing doing graphic design on computers, which was very novel at that point. And I did that for a few years, and then I decided, I want to get a job in tech. And that was the impulse, was like I'm tired of running a small business. I want to get a real job now. And so, and I know the story you're alluding to there, Prasad. So, I did the equivalent of applying for a lot of jobs online, except in 1988, which was I sat down with a copy of Macworld magazine and I entered the name and address of every advertiser in that copy of Macworld magazine into a database. And then I did a mail merge between that database and a cover letter. And I sent out 107 cover letters and resumes printed on paper, stuffed in envelopes with stamps on them. And I dropped them all in the mail like Christmas cards or something. And 107 little messages in a bottle went out into the world. And two of them came back. One of them from a now defunct mini computer company called Wang. They called me in for an interview. I went and did that. They laughed at me when I showed up because the bravado with which I'd written my cover letter made it seem like I was a vice presidential candidate, a VP candidate. And I walked in, except I was like 26, and they say, uh, Which, you know, in retrospect, I'm like, I didn't really care that they laughed at me. I thought it was kind of funny too. But in retrospect, I can't believe they didn't look at my resume, in which case they would have clearly known I was not a VP candidate.
Right.
But the other one went to Claris, and they ended up hiring me to do a sales job in California, and I did that for 6 months, and then found out about an opportunity to move to California to do UI design, and jumped at that, and things took off from there. Yeah.
Amazing. So now I'm going to change gears a little bit. So that was your hiring story. But when you went on to build the Apple of business intelligence in India, how did you hire? What were you looking for when you were hiring?
Well, so we actually created a very clear competency map, which I could share with you guys in some other forum. But we ended up deciding on 10 competencies that we would look for, that we would both use to evaluate inbound candidates and evaluate the people that you already had on team. And the way to describe them to you is, of the 10, they fell into 3 buckets. The top level bucket was craft, the second bucket was mindset, and the third was context. And as you can tell, I'd have them memorized because I'll tell them to you in a second. The reason we wanted to have 10 is because we wanted people to be able to memorize them, because that's how they were going to be able to use them in their day-to-day lives at work. Many companies have these big, giant career levels and all, and they're in spreadsheets. They have all these bullet points. Nobody can use them because nobody can remember them. So of our 10 competencies, the 4 craft skills were information architecture, interaction design, visual design, and pitching and storytelling. Okay, so 3 of those are really obvious and you learn in school. Pitching and storytelling, very few people are good at. Hardly anybody knows how to do, and they don't teach it in school very well. But that was one thing we really looked for, because that's critical to success as a designer. The 3 mindset skills were collaboration and teamwork, proactive and curious. And then the last one was critical and original thinking. And that was the one we looked at the hardest, was original thinking. And that was people that could have truly original, novel ideas to look at something from a different point of view. That was hard to find anywhere. And then the last 3 were context. We never hired for context because it was something we expected people to get once they joined the company. And so the context was, do you know and understand our users and their mindset? Do you know and understand the industry and the business that we're competing in? And then do you know and understand how this company builds software? So it was those 3 context skills. And then we had this radar diagram where we could map everybody, and we could look at, you know, do you have a kind of a nascent ability at this skill? You know, can you do this skill on your own? Can you show other people how to do this skill? Are you recognized in your geo for being gifted at this skill? And then the last one is, are you recognized in the world for having this skill? So the career map was something that people would fill out as this radar diagram, and it could serve them for an entire 30 or 40-year career. You know, nobody would ever fill out the whole map. And so we actually ended up interviewing quite a few new grads. We just had 5 join the team over at ThoughtSpot a couple of weeks ago. I'm no longer with ThoughtSpot, but I haven't been gone that long, and I'm still in advising and know all the people over there. So the most successful place we had for hiring, honestly, is we hired quite a few new grads from IIT Guwahati. We also interviewed a handful of folks from NID. That was the way that we got in the new grads. And those were probably our most successful hires. And some of those folks joined us 4 years ago and are now going on to master's degrees, or they've moved up their career ladder at ThoughtSpot, and they're now lead designers, kind of 2 or 3 levels above where I guess 3 or 4 levels above where they started. So
amazing. So can you tell me about interesting hiring stories? I can think of at least 2. One that you hired out of IIT Guwahati, and the other one was one where you got a referral. You know who I'm talking about. But I'd love to hear that, because it's like not a lot of people understand the power of networking or doing something outside of, you know, what is taught at school.
I'm not sure exactly who you're talking. Are you talking about Tom? Is that one of the ones you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so I get to that one. So look, I'll say in India, you know, if you guys follow me on LinkedIn, I'm posting all the time, and I'm I think perhaps unusually approachable, but I usually respond to people when they send me a DM. And in India in particular, we've had a handful of people reach out, and you know, they'll see a job posting at ThoughtSpot and they'll reach out, and then I tend to just connect them to the hiring manager. You know, I can't get anybody a job. And even when I was at ThoughtSpot, I didn't just hire people that way, but you know, people come into the system that way. And I found that to be, from the candidate's point of view, I think that's probably more effective than just applying blindly through the website. And you know, you're going to get a lot of people just ignoring you, I'd go back to my story of the letters in the mail. I mean, 107, I got back 2. So that's about a 2% hit ratio. And that's kind of what you have to think of. But honestly, it's not that expensive to, send people messages on LinkedIn and say, hey, I hope you saw my stuff. So there's some of that. In terms of networking, I tell young designers all the time, just be posting on social media and explaining to people what your experiences are. All of you, half the people on this call are new grads. And if there's a way for them to network with each other, they can start to exchange information and ideas, build some camaraderie. If you put your observations about design out there, products that you're seeing that are interesting, that aren't obvious, like I'm fascinated by things like parking meters, point of sale systems, ticketing kiosks. Like one of the most amazing UIs I ever saw was at the zoo in Tokyo, and they just had this fascinating UI for how to buy tickets. Like, are you paying attention to that sort of UI? It can't just be commenting on the latest version of Figma or talking about Squiggy or something, right? You got to find other examples of human computer interaction, and they are everywhere, all around you, all the time, if you stop and notice them. So talking about that stuff, I think, can help the market start to understand how your mind works, and that can help you in your hiring. And then the other example you were using was at Yahoo. We did get an inbound referral from Don Norman, who was referencing, who's referring us to a younger designer. I actually went and interviewed the guy. I was not that impressed in the interview itself. I thought he was a little quirky. I didn't quite see how he fit in the team. My instinct was to pass, but then it was pointed out to me that he had come in from a referral from Don Norman, and Don was a big fan and thought we should hire him, and that was good enough for me. So we ended up hiring him, and Tom went on to be one of the most consequential designers in modern history, having worked on Google Glass. He actually was sort of the early designer of Yahoo Answers and set a lot of the foundation for that. And went on. Now he runs a VC firm and things like that. Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
also my partner on the search assist, not Google, but the Yahoo search assist. It was like a pleasure working with him, and we would never have hired him unless somebody had referred.
Yeah, I'll point out that I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. A lot of the best designers that I know are neurodivergent, right? They're ADHD. They just see the world in a different way. And that makes it hard for them to get through things like interview screenings, right? Because they don't necessarily, and I struggle with this myself, don't necessarily make the best first impressions, especially earlier in their career when they maybe haven't figured out how, like, all the social niceties of getting into companies.
Right.
And so
Right.
if there's any hiring managers out there, or business leaders, like, I implore you to find space in your organization for people who are eccentric thinkers, because they're the ones that are going to come up with all the great ideas. And we all probably, many of us probably remember the Apple campaign, here's to the crazy ones. And if you go look at those crazy ones, ask yourself how many of these people would get through your interview loop. Because I'll bet you $100 that, like, Edison wouldn't make it past your screen, because they're a little quirky. And so Tom's a perfect example. Like, Tom's somebody that I think if you had just judged him through the normal structures of an interview, you might have passed him over. But again, he's one of the most consequential designers of the last 20 years. And so are you making space to hire those kinds of people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna take a quick 5-minute break. I have 2 more questions, and then we'll open it to the community. But before that, I want to take a 5-minute break and have Ashwin talk about something that we've been collaborating together on. So Ashwin, why don't you take it on, and then we'll get back to the questions.
Thanks, Prasad, and thanks, Bob, for providing me this opportunity to share the space in the initial phase. And hi, folks. I'm Ashwin. I'm actually working as a program manager here at UpGrad. So just allow me a second. I'm just like sharing my screen so that like we can quickly move to the context of this particular call. Yeah, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Great. So, if you are like one among the people who's actually probably thinking to design amazing products, probably to have a world-class like career in future, probably if at all you're really good at creativity, then I have really something amazing to tell you, that I have like one of its kind program, which is a master's in design UX, which is actually powered by OP Jindal and in collaboration with UX Reactor and T Hub. So just to give you an understanding about like OP Jindal, OP Jindal stays to be the #1 private university ranked by QS 2023, and they have been listed in one among the like institutes of eminence. So just to give you an understanding about like Institute of Eminence, there are total 12 universities in India right now, amongst like 1100 universities, which has been recognized by Ministry of India. All right. So if I speak about like little bit more university across this particular Institute of Eminence, I do have like BITS Pilani, I have like 4 IITs, and I have like 4 IIMs. So that's the level of like standards that we're actually speaking about, like when I speak about this particular program. Now, moving to UX Reactor, they be the knowledge partner over here, where UX Reactor is Inc. 5000 specialty organization in California, and they are the fastest growing like organization out there. And Tia being our like industry partner, they are going to help you guys out with your industry exposure and helping you out like great networks out there and helping you out and like becoming the great leaders out in both in terms of bringing in the world class faculties as well as providing you multiple other opportunities out over there. All right. So now one major thing that like comes when I speak about UX is having a great portfolio and having that art of like articulating what is available across that particular portfolio. So these two major things is one among the major pillars on which like we have constructed this particular program, where you're going to have like two live like apprenticeship opportunities along with your job and while you're doing this particular program. So this particular degree is going to like give you immense amount of like value in building up both in terms of your portfolio as well as your knowledge and becoming the future leader possible. All right. Now, moving on, when I say like we bring in a world-class faculties over here, I could just like name few over here, but like I have a lot of like people adding up in this particular list. As we have Bob over here, let me start off like with Bob. So Bob is a great like thought leader that I would say, who's an ex like a director of design at Apple, carrying more than like 30 years of experience, and he stays to be one of the guest lecturer in this particular program as well. And now moving on to like Mr. Prasad. This person is someone who is exceptional that I would say, as he's carrying more than 12 patents under him right now. And one among that is the search assistant feature that we are using on a day-to-day basis at this point of time. And apart from that, just to name a few more, like I would say, Mr. Satyam, who is the CEO and the managing partner, is in UX Reactor and has been the managing director at CITES as well. All right. And he is actually alumnus of like Harvard Business School and Stanford. So that's the sort of like world class like faculties that we are bringing in, so that we bring in a lot of like emerging leaders from the folks that like we have for this particular program. And now moving on to Greg, this person again stays to be one among the remarkable people because he has like founded the world's largest like design community, DXE, and he has been the ex chief design officer at Cisco, carrying more than like 20 plus like industry experience. So if I go on speaking, probably I can take another like probably 10-15 minutes in explaining about that. But brother, I'm like eager in hearing like a lot from Bob as well. So I'm just quickly dropping a link across this particular chat box. So you can just like feel free in like giving up your information, or admission counselors but get in touch with you tomorrow to give you a complete like walkthrough to this particular program. All right. So, Mr. Prasad, I would love to like hand over this stage to you right now, so you can just like take it ahead. As I'm eager to like hear it from Bob again.
Thank you, Ashwin. So again, I think coming back to the flow, one thing that Bob and I talked about a lot was especially this master's program. I was very curious. There's like, there were two things that you mentioned. The first one was how do you give feedback? Because you were talking about giving feedback and receiving feedback was a big deal, and storytelling. Can you tell me about how important it is to somebody's career as they're looking at building a UX career?
Well, I can talk about kind of stylistically how I give feedback, if that's sort of central to your question. Yeah. So, look, giving and receiving feedback's tough, but I believe in my heart that everybody in this on this call and everybody that's a designer is in their core, they're a creator and they want to make something. And I believe that anybody that wants to make something wants to make something that they're proud of. I think that the animating principles for most of us is that we want to make something that we can, theoretically take home to our parents and say, look at what I made at school with my friends. Like that's what drives
Right.
me. And I think that's what drives almost everybody I've ever worked with in an R&D
Right.
org. And so if you want to create something you're proud of, I think we all know that as painful as it is, that means you have to show it to other people, ask them what they think, and then make the thing better. As much as we want to keep it to ourselves and kind of protect it, that's not how you're going to make the best thing possible. So
Right.
I try to encourage my designers to think about feedback as an opportunity, not a necessity, and to not be anxious about it, right? So part of feedback, it's kind of like working out. You have to do it all the time. So
Right.
when I was leading the team that did the Apple Online Store, we had feedback sessions every 48 hours. So we had a 2-hour feedback session for the whole team on Tuesday. We had another one on Thursday. And then we had a 2-hour team review with our executive on Friday. Like they never had a chance to sit in their chair and kind of get stewed up in their own anxiety about trying to create something and wonder if it's good enough, because we had to show stuff like all the time. Almost
Right.
every other day you had to show something. So there was never any time for that procrastination and anxiety to build up.
Right.
And then when we had our design sessions, I think we had a culture, and this was true at ThoughtSpot and Pinterest as well. I tried to establish a culture where we all respected each other, but we were there to create the best possible ideas. And it didn't aid anybody to pull their punches when talking about the ideas. Like we had to be able to beat the ideas up and see how they would survive. So that required the designers, and this was always hard, especially when people started, it required them to be able to kind of disconnect themselves from what they created and just just let the thing that they created kind of stand on its own. And so my feedback was voluminous and direct, and I learned that at Apple as well. Like we don't have time to play around, and I would tell the team, like, look, as a creative director, when I walk into the room and I'm looking at the ideas, every cell in my body is asking, how can I make this better? Like that's the number one thing. That's all I'm thinking about. How can I make this better? And I can find a lot of stuff. I'm going to throw a lot of comments out and I'm not going to mince words. If I say anything that you take personally, something has gone wrong and you should talk to me about that later, because I truly did not mean that. But I'm going to go as hard as I can on the ideas. And again, in the spirit of trying to make them better. And you have to kind of be able to deal with that. And then what I would tell them is, look, I'm always going to find something. I've been doing this for a long time. There's always going to be something. The thing you have to ask yourself is like, what level of granularity was I highlighting? Was I saying, oh, this button could have a better name, this color's off? Or was I saying, oh, this flow doesn't make sense? Or was I saying, this whole thing's messed up? I don't understand this whole concept of what we're trying to do. And so those are like really different levels of feedback.
Right.
If I'm saying this whole thing doesn't make sense, the project's in serious trouble. If I'm saying this flow doesn't make sense, okay, you have some real work to do that's going to take a few days to figure out, but that's not, at the end of the line. If I'm complaining about button names and colors, like you have hit it out of the park. So you have to kind of learn to listen to that. And then I'd say when you're listening to feedback from executives, people that aren't used to giving design feedback, you have to learn to listen through the feedback. Like what's the real underlying issue they're getting at? Because they'll often give you feedback on surface level details when they have some instinct that's deeper than that. And the example I use is when I was at a company called My CFO, we had a public website, and one of the project managers came up to me in the hall and she's like, we have to make this link blue and make it underline like a traditional web link. And I was like, no, we don't. Like, what are you talking about? That's nowhere in the vernacular for the site. Like, why would we do that? It's like, it's just got to be blue. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And then the conversation ends. And then a few days later, I look at the website and she had gone behind my back and changed it blue, which, did not make me happy. And so when I confronted her about it, I was like, why'd you make it blue? She goes, well, people can't see it. And I'm like, oh, well, so the issue is that it's not prominent enough. She's like, yeah, it's not prominent enough. I'm like, great. Well, you should have said that, because we're graphic designers. There's 50 things we could have done to make it prominent, only one of which is making it blue. You wouldn't know that because you're not a designer, but if you can help us understand the underlying issue, then we can take that as a problem. And executives and people not, product managers, engineers, people that aren't more familiar with the design process, they often don't know how to give feedback that's about what they're really feeling. And so you have to find a way to sit with them and try to, unpeel the layers and get to it. It's almost, I don't know, it's like therapy or something. They're complaining about something, but it turns out it's some childhood drama or something. You have to be able to kind of get through it. And that takes a certain maturity and openness in the conversation. The
And
last
it's important to just ask.
Yeah. The last thing I'll leave with feedback is I try to remind designers all the time that simply because you're the one that created the comps, you've already won 90% of the argument, right? You're going to walk in and everybody's going to have to talk about the thing that you created. So you've already hit it out of the park. So you don't really have to like fight back that much. You should ask clarifying questions, but you shouldn't defend the work. Like all you should try to do is ask why they're saying that and try to understand what the real feedback is. Take notes and you can fix it later. Like, don't try to fix it in real time. Never, ever try to fix it in real time. Don't get into some mess where you're designing in real time in front of an audience. It will never go well and you'll never get to something interesting. So just like listen to the feedback. I can tell you it's like super annoying when I'm giving feedback to a designer and they're trying to tell me why I'm wrong the whole time. And they're just trying to defend the work. It just makes me nuts. And it deprives them of the opportunity to hear what somebody with a lot of experience who has a lot of different patterns in their head, and I also point out that's the main thing I've picked up with the experience is I have hundreds and hundreds of examples of UI that are in my head that I can pull from. If I was an LLM, I've got a like huge amount of training data that most people just haven't been paying attention long enough to acquire. So when you're showing me work, like you have an opportunity to tap into that gigantic reservoir of knowledge. So you should kind of just be quiet and let me talk, take notes. You can always ignore it later. Like that's fine. You don't have to respond to it, but you should at least give yourself the opportunity to hear it.
Right. So it's really important to, one, have that repository of information. Second, to ask questions of like, why are you saying what you're saying? So you can then think about other ways of solving it. And then the third thing that I also heard you mention was storytelling. Tell us about storytelling. How important is storytelling to growing in your career?
Well, you have to figure out how to tell the story of your career. So when you're interviewing, it's like we're having a presidential election in the United States, and the whole thing right now is how are the candidates going to tell their story of why they should be in those offices, right? Like that's a huge piece of the positioning for them. When you're interviewing for these jobs, people are going to want to know, why did you get into design? They want to know your origin story. That's how you started this call. You wanted to know my origin story before we talked about these more practical matters, right? So you have to have a way of telling your origin story. And for all designers, one thing that I think is lacking in all their origin stories is why they want to be a designer. I'm absolutely certain that everybody in this call is super smart, super creative. They could be doing lots of different things with their lives. UX design is a hard career. Maybe you can make some money, but it's a hard career. There's a lot of things that are a lot easier to do with your life than go argue with engineers and product managers. Trust me. So why is it you want to be a designer? And it can't be just because, well, I'm creative, right? There's got to be some change in the world that you want to see, and you're tapping into that. And that's got to be part of your story. How did you come to design? Maybe a parent introduced you. Maybe there was some interaction that you saw that drew you. Maybe you met some teacher that turned you on to it. Something, there's some inner thing. So that's part of your story. So like how you tell your own story is really important. And then how you pitch ideas, right? Like if you go watch how they make animated movies, for example, like you can't you can't just go to a location and have some actors improv something. Like an animated movie, you have to be able to act out the whole thing in front of the other animators and try to sell them on the idea. And it's the same thing with design ideas. Like you have to kind of be able to go, well, this happens and that happens, this thing moves over here. You have to have some way of pitching the flow, almost like an advertising person. Like that's how you're going to sell your ideas. And pitching is a very specific type of storytelling that people need to develop. And then the other piece that I see, this was a struggle. I learned this at Apple. It was a struggle both at Pinterest and ThoughtSpot. Is that designers, and I see it a lot in portfolio reviews. So everybody that's like interviewing and trying to put together a portfolio, like really listen to this next little piece. Like, don't show me a screen and tell me everything I can do on the screen, and then show me the next screen and tell me everything I can do on the next screen. That's how you write technical documentation. That's how you write the owner's manual. That's not how you explain the design, right? You have to start with a use case. When we did the Apple Store app, so a mobile app that you can use to buy Apple hardware products. One of the key features when in the first release was that you could buy an iPhone through the app, right? So when we had a chance to demo that to Steve Jobs and the other executives, what we showed them is how you would buy an iPhone using the Apple Store app. Like that was the use case. And we walked them through, we exercised the different screens to show that use case. We would never have just shown them the screens in isolation. It wouldn't, oh, here's the cart, here's the home page, here's the search results page. Like that wouldn't have made sense. We had to show them the whole flow. And if anybody saw Apple's recent announcement around all the AI features they had, I'd encourage you to go back and look at the segment about the woman that introduced Siri, the upgraded version of Siri. And she didn't talk about all the stuff that Siri will be able to do, and Siri will be able to do a lot of stuff. She set up this story. Her mother was coming into San Francisco, and she had to pick her mom up from the airport, and then they were going to lunch together. And then she had to drive from her house to the airport, pick up her mom, then get to the restaurant. And then the flight was delayed, right? So now everything had to change. She had to reevaluate the traffic, the restaurant reservation had to change, all this stuff had to change. And she talked about how she would use Siri to accomplish all that. And then she finishes the story if she picked up her mom on time and they had a lovely lunch and blah, 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 right? So you have a beginning. I'm giving you the scene and the setup. Then you create this tension. Something's changed. The flight's been delayed. And then you have this resolution with sort of Siri being positioned as the hero of the story, right? And that's how you show a design. That's how you pitch something. And very, very few designers have, it's not hard. You just have to think seriously about it. You have to realize that's what you're trying to do. And just a cursory look at a couple of YouTube videos about storytelling will help you understand how to structure beginning, middle, end, conflict, who's the hero of the story, stuff like that. It's not hard. It's actually a lot of fun. You just have to be.
You just have to practice it.
And you have to practice it, right? And one of the things I tell people all the time is get on some of these services like ADP List, the mentoring list, and just set up a bunch of calls so that you have the opportunity to tell your story over and over and over again. When some of the questions you're asking me, I obviously have fairly practiced answers, and I have those practiced answers because I've practiced them on ADP List when there was only one person on the call instead of 239. And so I think of ADP List like a late night comedy club where I can go and practice material with a small audience, and then eventually I get I get the joke down, right? And so now I have 20 jokes, and that's what people ask me about on podcasts and these kinds of events. But I wouldn't be able to answer the way I'm answering now if I hadn't done that. So practice is key. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, most people focus on their screens, their portfolio, but don't really spend time talking, thinking about the story. And I think this is really valuable. So I have one more question. In the meantime, anybody has questions, please type in your questions and then we will have Bob answer. Go ahead, Bob.
So just before we go on, since you mentioned the portfolio, I just want to make this one plug for an idea that I've seen very few people do, but I think could be pretty interesting. Most portfolios, and I know it's different interviewing in India, so I don't completely understand the India hiring context, but at least when I talk to my friends here in the US that are hiring managers, I don't know anybody reading those lengthy case studies. I go to these websites and I just feel for the designer because I can tell it was so painful to write these things, and I just don't think any design manager is going to spend time looking through that stuff. What I haven't seen in portfolios that I think would be really valuable. So I came to your portfolio and there was an embedded video that was no more than about 3 minutes, which is you giving me a demo of the product, just like I mentioned, right? You have to tell me a story and show me how your design solved a specific use case. I think most of the people on this call are of the video generation. I think you guys could all make these videos. It'd be easy. As a hiring manager, I would get to see you. I would get to evaluate your speaking skills. I'd get a better sense of what it might be like to work with you. From your point of view, you get to do as many takes as you want until you get it right. So it's not like you have to get up in front of a live audience and just improv it, right? You get to get the video the way you want it. So it takes the stakes off that. And I think there's a lot of people that watch a 3-minute video that wouldn't sit and read some big case study. So that might be something for some of you to experiment with on your website and try with some folks. And again, I think it's pretty low cost, and it's making those videos has got to be easier than writing those case studies, man. So
yes, absolutely. In fact, one of the things is most portfolios have this thing, which is the double diamond, thing. And the thing I think is how many people have applied double diamond at work? How many talk about like if they've done it, like how do they think about it?
Yeah, I don't think double diamond is a process. I think it's a pattern, right? I've
Mhm.
never seen anybody say this is the process and this is what we're doing and we're at step X of this, Z number of
Right,
processes. I think they look back and they go,
right,
oh, this is the pattern that things seem to follow.
right,
But design is this big, giant, crazy, squiggly line. We all know that. Every creative act is like that. It's not linear. That's what makes it
right.
creative. That's why we're all
Yeah,
in it.
and it's important to know how you navigated that non-linear process rather than say, this was the process and this is what I did.
Yeah, look, the story of the projects is all really interesting. That's probably a different call, but the
Right,
real story of how we made Yahoo Answers or how we created the Apple Store app or any of those things, like the real story of that is
right.
fascinating. And sadly,
Yeah,
like very few people talk about it. I think that's one of the things that's really missing from the dialogue. And I think it's missing for a lot of young designers. Like I try to
right,
encourage people to think of themselves as working in a medium, like you happen to be
right.
a practitioner, a creative in the medium of
Hmm.
software. And you should think of
Hmm.
yourself as though you were a musician or a filmmaker or a novelist or a painter, right? And those are all creators working in other mediums. And if you think of yourself as someone working in a medium, then the thing you would start to do is you would start to understand all the people that came before you and how these
Right.
various things came into being. Like if I went and talked to a young
Yeah,
musician, a jazz musician, a saxophone player, for example, I am certain that they would know they'd have their 50 favorite albums, they'd have their 25 favorite riffs, they could tell you all about their favorite saxophone player. Like they could just go off. I talk to
right.
designers of all ages all the time, and not one of them can reliably tell me their favorite app, or who
Yes,
created it, or why, or how. Like, they just don't have that knowledge because they don't think about the medium. But like,
right,
you should know where the Happy Mac came from, the Happy Mac
right,
icon. You should know where that came from. You
right.
should know how they came up with OS 10. You should know where
Mhm.
the iPhone came from. Like when I
Right.
ask you your favorite app, you should have 15 things that you can point out and why you like them, which can't be because you use it all the time. Like
Yes,
none of us really like YouTube or TikTok. I mean, they're kind of horrible UIs. We love the content, right? That's
right.
different.
Yes,
So if I asked you like, what's a really cool inspirational app, what would you pull
right,
out? And
right.
I don't know. I mean, I got a whole laundry
So
list of stuff I'd pull out, but
I have another question that I keep getting asked a lot, which was, and again, folks, if you have questions, please type it in because Bob would be happy to answer it. But this is one question I keep getting asked a lot, which is everybody believes UX is research. But, right, in Apple, we know Steve Jobs famously fired all his researchers. Tell us about that, right? How do you do UX research without, I mean, let me rephrase. How did you at Apple do UX without research?
yeah, so look, I'm just gonna repeat what you said. Everyone believes you have to use research to do UX, and yet all the products that we really admire, most of the products we really admire and look up to came from a company that does not do UX research. And when I say they do not do UX research, I mean it. Like there are no look, it's a big giant company. You'll find some pockets of people that say they're researchers, but if you look at the core products at Apple, there is no usability testing. There's nothing like that. If they did those sorts of things, stuff would leak, and you'd read about it in the press. And so it's not how it works. Um, Steve, when he came back in 1997, there was a kind of famous interaction where he was in Infinite Loop. He ran across the guy who ran the usability lab. And before Steve was there, I did some work at Apple. I've done usability tests in those labs. They had beautiful state of the art two-way or one-way glass labs, but, like the whole thing. They had the whole thing in Infinite Loop too, where Johnny Ives had his industrial design studio. And when Steve came back, he ran across the guy that ran the labs. He goes, "Hey, I'm going to need that budget back. So I need you to I want you to take your team out, have a great lunch, and then I need you to lay everybody off. And then I kind of need you to quit because we need all the money back." and and then they turn the labs into storage closets, which is what they are to this day. They're just filled with boxes and stuff. And so you might ask, how did Apple create those products without usability? And again, it goes back to this idea of software as a medium. And people at Apple have incredible taste. Like they understand the taste of software. They've looked at it. They've thought about it really hard. We beat the crap out of our ideas. Like we did, we redesigned checkout for the online store. We spent 14 months working on it. We reviewed it every week for 14 months with our VP. We we're looking at it multiple times a day. We put more time and effort into redesigning checkout than most companies would put into designing their whole product. And we released it, no usability issues whatsoever, like nothing. It goes out, no problem, is a $12 billion business at the time, didn't miss a beat, and they barely changed that design for 6 years. And when I asked one of the product managers, like, oh my God, like, how did you guys not change it for 6 years? He just said, well, we could never figure out how to improve it. Like everything that we thought needed to be fixed, we'd look at it and you guys had already kind of figured it out. And so
That's
there's a
because
lot.
every designer was accountable and responsible for the quality, right?
And we were all always looking at, like, we were just putting our heart and soul into how can we make it better? Does this make sense? Like every little thing in it that didn't feel right, we would just push on it until it did feel right. And, by the end, and that was true for everything we did on the online store. By the end, I could justify and explain every last pixel on that site. There was none of this, oh, let's run an experiment because we don't know. Like you
So
had to know.
the Apple Store had how many designers running a $14 billion product?
We had 6 designers, and then there was myself leading the group and one design ops person. So a team of eight people leading a store that an online store, probably the second. I think it might have been the second highest revenue online store operation at the time, behind Amazon, operating in 32 countries, 12,500 different instances. There was the web-based store, then there was the app, and then there was some stuff that we had the GarageBand lesson store, some stuff in iPhoto, and then other projects that we would do as well. Yeah. Just, I mean, it's just, we were very focused, and we were looking, and that's all of Apple. I mean, if you look at the group, the platform design team that designs iOS and Mac OS, that's maybe at this point, it might be 25 people. It's just the entire iPhone team, the entire group of people that created the iPhone hardware, software, operating system, the whole thing is 24 people. They're listed on the patent. You can go look it up. 24 people. The Mac team, 20 people. That's the total group, 20 people. That's it. It doesn't take these big, massive groups. It's not how it works. It takes focus. I like to tell people that design doesn't scale like an army. Design scales like a jazz band. It's all about interpersonal chemistry, how you play off each other. Do you have different ways of thinking? What's the chemistry and fit? And that was always a challenge for us, as we tried to build the team in India, because we didn't have a massive engineering team. And I think the mindset of my manager who had traditionally run engineering orgs, he's like, well, let's just hire more people, and let the design's taking too long. So let's just add more designers. And I was like, that's not how you get to the end faster. You can't just add more people and get there. If you want design to go faster, get your product managers to give us more precise asks, because they tended to give us really ambiguous input and then expected us to just kind of figure it out, which takes time. The last thing I'll say about Apple not using usability, and I should be really clear on this, is that Apple was able to do that because Apple worked on products where they themselves were reliable users. Like people that build the Photos app or the phone, like they use those products themselves, and they have a reliable and useful opinion about what those products should be. When I moved over to Apple Retail and I was making products that would be used by the retail staff, I spent a lot of time in the stores talking to the retail staff, observing them, stuff like that, because I wasn't a specialist in that area. And so when I talk about, how to use research and how not, you have to use research. I'm a huge fan of what I call foundational research. That's essentially anthropology, and going out and trying to get into the head of the user and understand what they're dealing with. And if at ThoughtSpot, like I'm not a data analyst, obviously, like it's not what I do. So we had to find some way to understand what those people were dealing with and what their work was about. Now, we wouldn't go back and ask them. Occasionally, we'd ask them if one solution was better than another because they were two really different approaches. But we wouldn't do usability tests where we would show them a dialog box and see how they click through it. Like I felt we had to use taste and judgment to figure that stuff out. And I'll also say that across the whole of my career, I've seen a lot of usability tests. They're almost always inconclusive. So they tend to just slow things down, and they undermine people's confidence in their decision-making ability, right? So like if somebody has an opportunity that they just look at a dialog box and they don't like it, they can just say, well, let's go test it. like it's very hard for you to get any momentum and make any sort of progress. And your designers stop playing hardball. They stop saying, no, this is the way it should be, because they know it's just going to get punted in this other forum. So, there's a way to use a usability test, but I think it can kind of undermine things as well.
Right. So you need to do research, but every designer is accountable, responsible, and incorporating it. But research can't be a reason to slow it down.
Well, I'd also say, like, I think people need to expand their concept of research. Like what I've seen with designers today is that most of the design decisions, to the degree we use research, we're using metrics, which is just numbers in a server log, right? You're not actually watching users. And at least when I used to sit through usability studies, you've sat through way more than I have, but if you sit and you watch real human beings use software for say 80 to 100 hours, you develop a certain intuition about how people use software. And it's not like anybody on this call uses software. Everybody on this call is tech superheroes. Like we are all the elites that know how to use tech. We are not normal. There's nobody on this call that has a normal relationship with tech. So you have to go find some way to watch normal people use software. And this, if you go back to my Medium example, if you're a musician, of course you would go to a concert. So you'd start to understand how people respond. If you were a filmmaker, of course you would go to the movies and sit in the audience. With software, you just can't do that. Like there's no forum where you can go and sit and watch people use software. So you have to find that for yourself. You have to ask the waiter at the restaurant, show me the device that you're using. Can I look behind the screen and see the employee input system you're using? How do you know your shift? How do you sign in? How do you sign out? You have to ask your cab driver. You have to, in my case, when my kids would bring their friends over, I'd always kind of annoyingly ask their friends what apps they used, and I would watch them on their phone, and you start to develop an intuition of how people process software. Like, again, you have to be a student of the medium. And that's not A/B testing and that sort of stuff. Like you have to go watch people use software. One of the best examples I share people is just go to an airport and sit around and watch older people try to navigate a plane, because they've got to get on a plane and they have to use you can't get on a plane without using a smartphone. And so you go watch somebody that's 65 or 70 and watch how confused they are. Like that's your usability test. Like this stuff doesn't work. And it's not just the 65-year-olds, because I know they're getting old, blah, blah, blah. It's also the 14-year-olds who are making the first flight, without their parents. And it's nerve-wracking to have to navigate all that stuff. And that's the world we've created. If you're working on an enterprise software company, if it's at all possible, go to one of your customers and see if you can just be a fly on the wall for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sahiti and Ashwin, do we have any questions on the chat?
Yes, we do have certain questions. Yes, I think you can go ahead.
Yeah. So we have questions, a lot of questions about 27. I'll just someone's asking, what is the future scope of you for UX design in India, and what advice would you give to someone who wants to start building a portfolio in this domain?
Bob, you want to take that? Because
So
you're
again,
the one you just recently built the team.
Yeah. I don't have a big purview into the whole, obviously India design market's gigantic, so I don't have a big understanding of it. My experience being there was that design, it felt to me like it kind of skipped desktop computing, or, certainly desktop web stuff, and it kind of went straight to mobile. And so for us building enterprise software sites that worked in web browsers, like that was a challenge, because mobile, you just can't do the level of complexity that you can do in something like a BI data analytics tool, right? So we had trouble with that. So I suspect in India, you're going to see increasing demand for designers who can work on more complex screens, doing more complex things. And so that'd be one place where I'd expect to see things expand. It was also my experience that although we had a fairly easy time finding people with graphic design and visual design skills, it was harder to find people with really good interaction design skills. And then it was particularly difficult to find people who really understood information architecture and conceptual design, which is basically how to think differently about it. Like, how do you approach a particular feature? How do you want to conceptualize it in the user's mind? And it gets really abstract, and that sort of design almost borders more on philosophy. Like Like the idea of a feed, for example, like what does that mean philosophically, and where did that idea come from? And it's about newness and freshness and never being empty and things like that. It's like it's a way of positioning what they do in Instagram and Facebook and stuff. And somebody had to come up philosophically with that idea. And there's very few designers that can do that. Like in the whole of my career, I've met maybe 10, but the people that can do that have jobs for life. So that's definitely a skill to aspire to and something to focus on.
We see, in fact, from our side too, is like the quality of interview questions have increased dramatically because there's like, people are hiring consultants to do interviews. The kinds of expectations are there. Their hiring is up. The demand for UX designers is up, but it's just that, they want exactly what you said. Do you have the conceptual abilities? Do you have the critical thinking skills? Do you have the UX skills, not the graphic skills? And I think that has changed a lot, but the demand is just insane. It's just the people are not there.
Yeah, and those are the kinds of mental skills that you get from studying liberal arts. It's not the only way to get them, but there's a different set of skills that we don't think of as design skills, like writing, not in terms of your ability to write that somebody else can read what you've written, but do you know how to write as a way to think, right?
Yes.
Do you know how to sketch as a way to think? Like, do you know how to think? There's a whole bunch of bookshelf here is just about thinking models and how to become a better thinker and how to become a better critical thinker. And that's something that you're not going to pick up in you're going to get that at config. You're not going to pick that up at some tactical thing. These tactical skills are, knowing how to use Figma, that kind of tactical stuff, that stuff is going to be very hard to defend from a career perspective.
Figma is not the big deal. Yeah.
Figma is just a tool. Like your ability to produce the designs is not the thing. It's your ability to come up with a novel new idea that's going to be the thing.
Sahiti, what other questions do we have?
So we have one more question from Vanshika, where she asks, how do you see AI and machine learning impacting UX design, and how can designers prepare for this shift?
I mean, I've thought a lot about this, and I think Bob and I have discussed about it. I think from my perspective, when I look at it, it's it's not about using AI. Anybody, the best example I can give is a hammer. Anybody that uses a hammer is not a carpenter. It's about managing AI to create stuff, right? So how do you decide how you're going to engage with the AI? What questions are you going to ask? And what perspective are you bringing to the table? I think that is going to be a critical thing. In fact, a lot of people that I talk to, think about like, okay, if I'm hiring a UX designer, do they understand how to manage AI, not use AI? Because anybody can use ChatGPT and get an answer. But the point is that the correct answer or is that the best answer? That is something only that people can do. Bob, your thoughts?
Well, I think it's kind of a two-dimensional question. And Prasad, you kind of hit the first piece, which is how do I use design as a practitioner and part of my toolkit? And I agree with what you said. I think the other question was, how's it going to impact UI? And I think it's going to become an alternative way of interacting with computers that's different from a GUI, right? And that maybe augments a GUI, but is kind of an alternative interaction mechanism. So far, all we've seen is chat, which is essentially a return to command line interfaces. But I think that will shift, and you'll have stuff that'll be more about voice interfaces and some other things that we just haven't thought of yet. And AI, because it's probabilistic instead of deterministic, is going to create a whole host of challenges for how you design a piece of software that has AI underneath it, right? Users expect software to do the same thing every time. And when it stops doing that, it's going to be a thing, right? And users are going to have to understand that. So I'm not sure. I don't think anybody in the world can tell you where AI is going from how it's going to impact stuff. Certainly, there's theories that it's going to eliminate the concept of an app. You're just going to tell the device what you want, what your goal is, and it's going to assemble functionality from all these different places to achieve that. There's other theories that you'll see a tool like dramatically, if a tool has 100 different options in it, in any given context, it will only show you the 2 that matter because it's using AI to know what you need at this particular moment. Those are all theories of where AI could go, and they seem reasonable theories. None of us know, but that's if I was thinking about AI and design, I'd probably spend more time thinking about that question than about how to use AI as part of my individual toolkit. So, but both are certainly important, you know.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. Sahiti, any other questions we can probably take? Do you have time for 2 or 3 more questions, Bob?
Yeah. I'm fine. Yeah.
Cool.
So, 1 second. So we have Pallavi asking us, she's a fresher having no real world experience at all. So how does she start and what projects she has to work on, or what does she have to do to get into the field?
So look, I think getting into UX design is like getting into other creative professionals, like creative professions now. So asking how you build a portfolio and how you get in, you could ask that question. Oh, I'm a budding screenwriter. How do I get, how do I start building a portfolio of screen material? I'm a budding photographer. How do I build up a book so I can become a photographer? And frankly, the question is, you probably do a lot of work for free. You probably try to find friends that you can build stuff with, and you try to create projects, and you try to start developing reps so you just increase your skills and your abilities. So if I was just out of college, I'd try to find some of my friends who graduated with degrees in engineering and see if you can help them and just start trying to get more work done. If you can, again, and I know India, it's a very different market. In the US and Europe, I would encourage people to try to go find jobs at agencies so that they could do as many different things as possible and get through as many different projects as possible. And then oddly, I don't think it's a bad use of time to go get a job in sales, which I know sounds goofy. That's sort of how I started my design career. There's something to be said for getting a job in sales, not the least of which is that they're easier to get because they generate revenue for a company. They will get you a paycheck, which frees up some anxiety for people and gets them time. When you're selling, you have to understand, you're interacting with the users and the customers. So you start to develop a sense of what they care about. You have to get very good conversationally. You have to learn how to listen. A lot of the stuff we talked about early in the call with pitching and storytelling, taking feedback, like you're going to learn all that in doing sales. I'm not saying you should do sales forever. I'm not even saying you should do it for more than 6 or 12 months, but I think that there's a lot of lessons that are useful professionally. I also, someone who has young adult children, my kids are 24 and 26. I also know that getting out of college, a lot of what you're trying to do is just establish your ability to sort of function in a non-regulated world. Like it's the first time you're outside the structure of school and simply, getting someplace on a regular time, like just, getting your food. Like it's just, a lot of the new grads at ThoughtSpot, we spend a lot of time just trying to help them how to manage their time, help them understand how to manage time and how to manage their day outside the structure of school. And so being in an environment like sales can help you develop those sort of adulting skills as well, which are super
I
valuable.
I did sales. I was selling those little fire extinguishers door to door.
Yeah. I mean, look, ideally you do sales for a tech company, because then you get some exposure. And if you can get that job, and like at ThoughtSpot, we don't have a sales office in India, but I look at some of the younger folks on the sales team there, and
Right.
that's kind of how I started at Claris at the very beginning of my career. And that's how I got the design job, because my job was to go around and demo the existing products. And so I was flying around parts of the central United States, having to get up on stage and show Claris CAD and stuff. So I had to get used to standing up and presenting, which are all things you have to have as a designer. And then because I was in the company, people kind of knew me, knew what I was interested in. I used to send like these emails with you. I didn't realize they were UI suggestions, but I looked back at some of those emails and like, oh, I had UI suggestions that I was sending into the product teams. So it's not crazy that they would then and eventually connect the dots of, oh, we need a designer. It seems like this guy's kind of interested. So it's just, I think it's probably an easier foothold to get into a company as a possibility to go in as a salesperson rather than as a designer. It's just going to be hard getting hired as a designer right now. It's not that it won't
Absolutely. Yeah,
happen.
no,
I hope it happens for you. I'm just telling you, it's going to be hard.
it is hard. It is hard
Yeah.
because nobody wants to invest in people who are just starting off. And what you do want to have a start somewhere. Sahiti, what other question do we have?
So we have what's the ideal portfolio, and what elements it needs to be there to have a good portfolio to grab the attention.
So look, I want to know somebody's story. I like right from the beginning, it's what I said earlier. I want to know why you're a designer. And I want you to get through that stuff. If we're talking about there's online portfolios, and then there's a portfolio presentation. So if it's an online portfolio, the top of the screen is a little bit like who you are, why you want to be a designer. And like when I say it like a little thing, I mean like a LinkedIn headline. Like you've got to get it to a tight statement. It's sort of the artist statement of why you're doing this and who you are. And then I'd want to see, honestly, I'd probably just want to see 2 or 3 projects, in a portfolio presentation where you have an hour. Maybe you get through 2 projects, where you're gonna show me in depth a couple of things. The way that I like to see portfolios is I like to see portfolios that communicate in headlines rather than punchlines. It's probably the way I describe it. So the best portfolios, they just say, here's the work, boom, boom, boom. And again, I think this is where the video idea could work, right? I'm going to show you how ideally I'm going to show you before and after. This is the system that I initially saw, and my goal was to make it better. This is how it worked when I got it. Here's my better design. Don't really explain it, just show me, And I did that when I was working in Apple retail. I did a redesign of the handheld point of sale system, and my presentation showed how they did a single item transaction, how they sold an accessory with the existing system, and then I showed how the redesign did it. And the redesign, if I may say, was dramatically better, right? And so that whole thing took about 90 seconds. And by the time I finished that, I had the audience's attention, right? That was the headline. What you had was good. I just showed you something that was remarkably better. And the audience kind of sits up and goes, whoa, like, wow, that's like, yeah, okay, cool. Now the audience wants to know how it worked. It's like, okay, now
Right.
let me deconstruct it for you and show you the logic and the rationale.
Right.
So that's what I mean about communicating in headlines. Most people communicate in punchlines. And what they're doing is they're saying, here's the business problem. Then I did these personas, and I did this research, then I developed this information architecture. It's all these abstract deliverables. And then finally at the bottom of the page, when the audience is completely exhausted, you have the reveal, and it's like, and here's 3 screens, right? And that's kind of a punchline approach, where I'm going to give you all the big setup and then the reveals at the end. But the problem is none of us are Steve Jobs, right? Like none of us are comedians. Nobody's paying to see us. Like we don't have the audience's attention. We haven't earned their attention at the beginning. And so it's impossible for us to hold their attention through all that stuff for the big reveal at the end. So it simply doesn't work for any of us. So I would encourage you to think like, I'm going to lead with the headline. Here's the big idea. Boom. Aren't you impressed? And then the audience is like, whoa, like that's cool. Tell me how you got to that. Then you've earned the ability for them to kind of sit and you've earned their attention, and then you can explain everything.
Yes.
And I find that works both conversationally. That works both conversationally if you're doing an in-person portfolio review, and it works online when you're doing your online portfolio.
I remember this was something you were driving in terms of storytelling at Yahoo. This was the format that we had to do to tell the story. So
you got to start with the big idea, man.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Bob. This has been really super valuable. I think everybody really appreciated it. We have almost like 180 folks. Again, for those of you that are interested, this master's degree is designed for people who are working professionals who want to get into leadership opportunities. This focuses purely on how would you build an amazing portfolio? How would you tell the story? How would you communicate in the team? How do you get into those opportunities that Bob was talking about? And I think if you're interested and you want to learn more, fill up the form, and I'm sure somebody from UpGrad would reach out to you. But with that said, thank you very much, Bob. And this is
if I can just say, I'm just gonna make one last plug before we let everybody go. Like I want to remind everybody that we are all privileged to work in the most important cultural medium being produced today. There is absolutely no doubt that software has a bigger impact on the world today than anything happening in movies, music, or books. It is hard, but it is worth it, because all those people out there on the other side of the glass, they all need us. They all need us to pay attention and to create something they can use and that they love. And it feels like the people who made it cared, because there is way too much technology where it's clear that the makers did not care about what they were making, and they don't care about the people on the other side of the glass. They need us to be designers and to get in there and fight the good fight. It's going to be tiring. It's going to be hard. I've been doing it for 35 years. The only thing that keeps me going is I think about the people on the other side of the glass because they need us. So please be a designer. Please figure it out. Please fight the good fight. The digital built environment needs to be dramatically better. We as humanity need that. So that's what I will leave you with.
Thank you, Bob. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you
This
all.
was
Thanks, Bob.
amazing.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for everyone who's joined this session, and I hope you have a good night. Thank you so much, and thank you.